The turkey had been in the oven for 3 hours when my daughter-in-law told me I was holding my fork wrong. That was the moment I should have known something was off. Not about the fork. I've been holding a fork for 68 years. I think I know how it works. But about the whole evening, the way my son Eugene kept checking his phone under the table, the way my daughter-in-law Brenda laughed just a half second too late at everything I said, like she was monitoring herself. My 2 grandchildren, Tyler and Mia, were quieter than usual, spending most of the dinner pushing mashed potatoes around their plates and glancing at their parents. It was Thanksgiving, and something in that house felt like it was holding its breath. I told myself I was being an old fool. My wife Margaret had passed 14 months before, and I'd spent most of that time alone in our house in Dayton, Ohio, rattling around 4 bedrooms and 2.5 bathrooms that used to feel full. Every grief counselor and well-meaning neighbor had told me the same thing. The first holidays are the hardest. Give yourself grace. So that's what I tried to do. I dressed up in the blue sweater Margaret had bought me 2 Christmases ago, still had the department store crease in it, and I drove 40 minutes to Eugene's house in the suburbs, and I told myself tonight would be good. And it was good, mostly. Brenda's stuffing was excellent, though I'd never tell her that Margaret's was better. Tyler had just turned 16 and spent 10 minutes showing me something on his phone that I didn't fully understand, but nodded along to anyway. Little Mia, 9 years old, had saved me a seat next to her and whispered that she'd put extra cranberry sauce on my plate because she remembered I liked it. That part was real. That part I hold on to. We were somewhere in the middle of dessert, pumpkin pie store-bought, which Margaret never would have allowed, when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I almost didn't answer it. I had a rule about phones at the dinner table, a rule I was proud of maintaining, even when everyone else had abandoned it. But the buzz came again immediately, and then a third time, and something made me pull it out. Unknown number. Ohio area code, but not one I recognized. "Excuse me a moment," I said, and stepped into the hallway near the coat closet. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was a man's, older, and he was speaking quietly, like he didn't want to be overheard. "Is this Arthur Bellamy?" "It is. Who's calling?" "Sir, I don't have much time to explain. You need to go home. Right now. I'm your neighbor. I live in the grey house across the street, the one with the blue shutters. My name is Roy. I've called the non-emergency police line and they're sending someone, but you need to be there." I pressed the phone harder against my ear. "Roy, I don't think we've ever spoken. What's happening at my house?" "Someone's inside," he said. "I saw a car pull up about an hour ago. A man went around back. I watched through my window for a while, thinking maybe it was a repairman or something, but then the light started moving around inside. Flashlight, I think. I've lived across from your house for 11 years. I know when something isn't right." I stood very still in that hallway. Through the door I could hear the muffled sounds of the dinner table, Eugene's voice, Brenda's laugh, the clatter of Tyler's fork. "Did you call 911? I asked. "I called the non-emergency line first because I wasn't certain, but they're treating it as a possible break-in and sending a unit. I just thought you should know. I have your number from the neighborhood directory, the old paper one from 2019. I wasn't sure it was still good." "Thank you, Roy," I said. "I'm coming." I stood there for another 3 seconds, phone in my hand, trying to figure out what to say when I walked back into that dining room. I decided on the truth, or a version of it. I went back to the table and said there might be a problem at the house, nothing to worry about, probably nothing, but I needed to drive back and check. Eugene put his napkin down. "Dad, it's Thanksgiving. What kind of problem?" "A neighbor thinks someone might have gotten into the house. The police are already on their way. It's probably a misunderstanding." Brenda said, "Oh my God." Eugene said he'd come with me. I told him no, stay with the kids. I'd call as soon as I knew anything. He pushed back on that for a moment, and then, and I remember this very clearly, he sat back down. He sat back down very quickly. At the time I thought he was respecting my wishes. I understand it differently now. The drive from Eugene's house to mine takes 40 minutes on a normal day. That night, with the highway half empty and my foot heavier than usual on the accelerator, I made it in 32. The whole way I kept telling myself it was probably nothing. A kid who'd wandered into the wrong yard. A meter reader who'd lost track of the hour. Margaret always said I catastrophized, that I turned every bump in the night into a disaster before I had any evidence. But Margaret wasn't there anymore, and her voice in my head had gotten quieter over the past year. I turned onto our street and immediately saw the police cruiser parked at an angle in front of my house, lights going. There was an officer standing on my front porch, and another one was coming around from the side yard. I pulled into the driveway and got out before I'd fully put the car in park. The officer on the porch was young, maybe 25, and she introduced herself as Officer Holt. She told me they'd found signs of forced entry at the back door. The lock had been worked, not broken, which she said was significant. The house was clear now. Whoever had been inside was gone by the time they arrived. "Is anything missing?" she asked. I didn't know yet. We went inside together, and I started going through rooms. My laptop was still on the kitchen table. The television was still on the wall. Margaret's jewellery box was still on the dresser, exactly where I'd left it, and I touched the top of it for a moment before moving on. Then I went to the study. Margaret and I had used the study mostly for taxes and family paperwork. There was an old roll-top desk in there that had belonged to her father, and in the bottom drawer behind a false panel that I'd installed myself about 20 years ago, I kept our important documents: the deed to the house, insurance papers, and a manila envelope containing the savings bonds. Over 30 years of careful saving, Margaret and I had accumulated $340,000 in US savings bonds. We'd started them when Eugene was small, adding to them every year, rolling them over when they matured. They were meant to be part of his inheritance eventually, and part of a college fund for Tyler and Mia. We never talked about them much. We were private people about money, the way people from our generation tend to be. But Eugene knew they existed. I had told him once, maybe 3 or 4 years ago during a conversation about end-of-life planning that he had initiated. The false panel in the desk was open. The manila envelope was gone. I stood in the study with Officer Holt for what felt like a very long time without saying anything. "Mr. Bellamy," she said finally, "you need to tell me what was in that compartment." I told her. I heard my own voice explaining it very calmly, like I was describing something happening to a stranger. Savings bonds. Federal. 34 years of savings. My wife's name was still on most of them. She wrote everything down. Then she asked if anyone else knew about that hiding place. I looked at the roll-top desk. Margaret's father had brought it up from Kentucky in the back of a pickup truck in 1987. Margaret used to keep ribbon candy in the top right drawer, and sometimes when I'm in that room I still smell it, even though the candy has been gone for years. "My son," I said. My son knew. I did not call Eugene that night. I know that sounds strange, but I sat in my living room after the officers left. They'd taken photos, filed a report, told me to contact my bank about the bonds as soon as possible, and I thought about the dinner table. The way he'd sat back down so quickly, the way he barely seemed surprised when I said someone might be in my house. I thought about the past 2 years, the phone calls that had started late and ended abruptly when I walked into the room during my visits. Brenda's careful, measuring eyes. I am not a detective. I'm a retired mechanical engineer from Dayton, Ohio, and the thing I know how to do is look at a system and figure out how the parts fit together. And the parts were fitting together in a way I did not want them to. I went to bed at 2 in the morning, which is something I never do, and I lay there in the dark in the house Margaret and I had shared for 31 years, and I talked to her. I do that sometimes. I know she can't hear me. But I told her what had happened, and I asked her what she would do. She would have made tea, I think. She would have sat in the kitchen with her hands around the mug and thought it through very slowly, before she said a single word. She never rushed to judgment. That was her great gift, and sometimes her great frustration to me, because I am someone who rushes. In the morning, I called my attorney. Dennis Albright had been our family attorney for 22 years. He handled our wills, our property, the refinance in 2009. He was also, I happen to know, an early riser because we crossed paths at the same diner on Wilmington Avenue enough times over the years. I called him at 7:15 and he answered on the second ring. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I'd trusted him for 22 years. "Arthur," he said when I finished, "do not contact Eugene yet. Let the police do their work. But there are some things we should do on our end immediately." We spent the next hour on the phone. The savings bonds, it turned out, were actually quite difficult to cash. Federal savings bonds require identity verification, and since most of them still had Margaret's name on them, a thief would face significant obstacles trying to redeem them without proper documentation. Dennis explained that whoever had taken them might not have fully understood what they'd stolen. It wasn't like taking cash. There were processes. Which means, Dennis said, they may still have them. That thought sat with me all day. The police called me on the following Monday. They had been looking into it, following up on a few things from the neighborhood, and they had a question. Did I know a man named Craig Dalton? I didn't. "He's a known associate of your son," the detective told me. "We've been able to place his vehicle in your neighborhood on Thanksgiving evening." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "Eugene hired him," the detective continued, and his voice was steady and not unkind. "We don't have everything yet, Mr. Bellamy, and I want to be honest with you about that. But we have enough to bring your son in for questioning. I wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing before we did." "I appreciate that," I said. "Is there anything you want to tell me before we proceed?" I thought about Eugene at 7 years old, learning to ride a bicycle in this very driveway. I thought about him at Margaret's funeral, crying in a way that seemed genuine, standing at the graveside with his arm around Brenda, while Tyler held Mia's hand. I thought about the blue sweater and the store-bought pie and Mia putting extra cranberry sauce on my plate. "No," I said. "Nothing I need to tell you. Do what you need to do." Eugene called me 2 hours later. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. On the fourth call, I answered, "Dad." His voice was different from anything I'd heard from him before, not the careful, managing tone of the dinner table, something rawer. "Dad, I need to talk to you." "Then talk. I need to see you in person. Can I come over?" I said yes. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because Dennis had told me it was better for the legal process if I heard what Eugene had to say. Maybe because he was my son. Maybe both. He arrived within the hour. He came alone, without Brenda, which surprised me. He looked like he hadn't slept. He sat down in the living room, the same couch he'd grown up watching football on, and he put his face in his hands. "I didn't think you'd go home," he said. "I thought with Roy calling, I thought the whole thing would fall apart before anyone took anything." I stared at him. "Say that again." He looked up. His eyes were red. "I was the one who told Roy to call you." The room was very quiet. Outside, a car went by on the street. "You planned all of it," I said slowly. "But then you also arranged for me to be warned." I panicked. He pressed his hands together between his knees. "Craig. I'd already paid Craig half the money. I couldn't call it off without losing that, and I thought if Roy called you and you came home, Craig would get scared and leave before he found anything, and maybe nothing would actually happen, and I could figure out something else." But he'd already been there for an hour when Roy called me. Eugene was quiet. "He found them, Eugene." "I know. I looked at my son for a long time. He was 52 years old. He had his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, and somewhere along the way he had become someone I was not sure I recognized." "How much do you owe?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "About 400,000. "To whom?" "Investment fund. Private. I made some decisions 2 years ago after Mum died. I thought I could." He stopped. "Start I could." He started again. I made bad decisions, Dad. I kept trying to fix them and made worse ones. The people I owe money to aren't patient. I thought about the late phone calls, the 2 years of tension I'd chalked up to grief, to the adjustment of losing Margaret. You could have come to me, I said. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it wasn't what I expected. I was ashamed, he said. And I knew you'd say no, or you'd want to oversee everything, manage it, turn it into a lesson. I didn't want a lesson. I wanted it to just go away. That was the most honest thing he'd said in 2 years. It didn't help him, but I noted it. Craig Dalton was arrested 4 days later. The bonds were recovered from his apartment, still in the manila envelope, untouched. He apparently hadn't known what to do with them, which confirmed what Dennis had told me. Eugene was charged with conspiracy to commit burglary. He hired his own attorney, which was the right call, because I made clear to Dennis that I would not be funding his defense. The criminal process took the better part of 9 months. I won't detail all of it. Eugene ultimately pleaded guilty to a reduced charge, avoided prison time, and was sentenced to 3 years of probation, community service, and mandatory financial counseling. Brenda stayed with him, which I won't pretend to fully understand, but which was her right to decide. During those 9 months, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I owed my family and what I didn't. I thought about Tyler, who was 16 and blameless. I thought about Mia, who had saved me a seat and put cranberry sauce on my plate because she remembered I liked it. I thought about what it meant to be a grandfather versus what it meant to be a father, and whether those two things required different things from me. I met with Dennis 3 times to revise my estate plan. The savings bonds, recovered and intact, became the centerpiece of a trust, one specifically designed for Tyler and Mia's education and early adult support, structured so that neither of their parents could access or direct the funds. Tyler's college tuition would be covered. Mia's would be covered. There was a provision for a down payment on the first home for each of them when the time came. Eugene was removed from my will entirely, except for one item: Margaret's wedding ring, which she had asked me to pass to him for Brenda. I honored that. It was the last thing I gave him, and I gave it freely. Roy, my neighbor with the grey house and the blue shutters, turned out to be a 73-year-old retired postal worker named Roy Kimura. We had somehow lived across the street from each other for 11 years without learning each other's names. After everything settled down, I walked over one Sunday afternoon with a plate of cookies, store-bought, because I'm a terrible baker, but I chose the good ones from the bakery on 5th, and I knocked on his door. He was a quiet man. He had a small dog named Pepper, who sniffed my shoes extensively. We sat on his porch for about an hour and talked about the neighborhood, about the way Wilmington Avenue had changed over the decades, about his wife, who had passed 7 years ago. He showed me a picture of her. She had a good face, the kind that made you feel like you could trust her with something important. "Why did you call me?" I asked him at some point. "You could have just called the police and left it at that." Roy thought about it. "My wife always said if you can do a little more, you should. The police were already coming. But you deserve to know directly. It's your house." He scratched Pepper behind the ears. "Also, I didn't know what was going on. For all I knew, it was a medical emergency. Someone fell inside. I just thought you should know." That was it. No drama. No grand reasoning. A man who had lost his wife decided to be the kind of neighbor his wife would have wanted him to be. I have thought about that a lot in the year since. I still live in the house on Wilmington Avenue. I have repaired the back door with a better lock, and I've moved the important documents to a safe deposit box at the credit union 3 blocks away, which is where they should have been all along. Margaret would have rolled her eyes at the whole story, I think. She would have been furious at Eugene, and then quietly, steadily heartbroken, and then eventually she would have found a way to hold both things at once, her anger and her love, the way she held most difficult things. She was better at that than I am. I'm still learning. Tyler came to see me last spring by himself, driving over on a Saturday. He's 17 now, taller than Eugene by an inch. He sat in the kitchen and we made sandwiches, and he asked me, carefully, if I was still angry at his dad. I thought about how to answer that for a long time. "I'm not angry," I said finally. "I'm sad. There's a difference." He nodded. "He's a thoughtful kid. I think he's going to be okay." Mia sends me drawings in the mail still. Actual drawings on actual paper, in envelopes with handwritten addresses. The last one was a turkey, because she said she was practicing for Thanksgiving and wanted me to know she was thinking about me. I got it stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet that says Ohio, the heart of it all, which Margaret bought at a highway rest stop sometime in the early 90s, and which has somehow survived every kitchen renovation since. I look at it sometimes when I'm making coffee in the morning. The drawing and the magnet, both. Some things hold. Some things, it turns out, don't. You have to learn to tell the difference. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. More than a year now, and I still find myself going back to that Thanksgiving table in my mind. The store-bought pie, the way Eugene sat back down so quickly, the way I told myself I was being an old fool for noticing. I wasn't being a fool. I was just hoping I was wrong. There's a difference, and learning that difference might be the most painful thing this whole experience taught me. People talk about betrayal like it's a single moment, like there's a before and an after, a clean line you can point to. But that's not how it works. The betrayal didn't happen when Craig walked through my back door with a flashlight. It had been happening for 2 years. In every phone call Eugene ended early, every visit where something felt slightly off, every time I unease away under grief and adjustment, because it was easier than the alternative. I let myself be fooled because I wanted to be. That's on me. Not all of it, but some of it. What I understand now is that there's a kind of courage that has nothing to do with boldness or anger. It's quieter than that. It's the courage to look clearly at something you love and see it as it actually is, not as you need it to be. Eugene was my son, and I loved him, and he was also a man who hired someone to rob his own father. Both things were true at the same time. Holding that, really holding it without flinching away to one side or the other, that took more out of me than anything else in this story. I keep thinking about Roy, a 73-year-old man across the street, someone I'd never spoken to in 11 years of living 20 feet from each other. He saw something wrong, and he did more than the minimum. He didn't have to track down my number from an old neighborhood directory. He didn't have to pick up the phone at all. But his wife had told him, if you can do a little more, you should. So he did. And because of that, $340,000 in savings bonds were recovered. Tyler's college fund survived. Mia's future survived. One small decision by a decent man changed the entire outcome of my family's story. That's not luck. That's what it looks like when someone has quietly built a life around doing the right thing, day after day, even when nobody's watching and there's no obvious reward for it. I think about that a lot when I'm tempted to take the easy way out of something. The small choices accumulate. They become the person you are. Eugene made small choices for 2 years, to hide, to avoid, to scheme instead of ask for help. And they accumulated into something that cost him his father's trust and his children's inheritance. I made small choices too, to look away when my instincts were telling me something, and those cost me time and peace and $340,000 worth of documents before Roy's phone call changed the direction of everything. None of us gets to skip the consequences of what we choose. Even the choices we make quietly, even the ones we think nobody notices. The ledger always balances eventually. That's not religion. That's just the way things work when you pay close enough attention. I'm still paying attention. That's what I've got left. And I intend to use it.